Good afternoon. The lies linking me with the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today. The individuals lying about me are devoid of ethical standards, humility, and respect. I do not object to their ignorance, but rather I reject their mean-spirited attempts to defame my reputation.
She used to be everywhere. The red coat on the tarmac, the hand he could never quite hold, the face the cameras chased through every state dinner and every campaign rally. Now you have to search for her. Melania Trump, the First Lady of the United States, has made fewer than 20 public appearances this entire term. Less than half of what she managed at the same point in Trump's first term. Half. That is not a busy schedule. That is a woman who has, by any normal measure, gone missing in plain sight. Think about what that job usually looks like. A First Lady greets foreign leaders. She stands beside her husband for the State of the Union. She champions a public cause, the way past First Ladies pushed literacy or healthy eating. Melania does almost none of that anymore. Her one big moment this year was sitting quietly with her children during the February State of the Union, an appearance so rare that reporters wrote entire stories just describing what she wore and how she sat. When one dinner becomes a headline, you know how empty the rest of the calendar really is. And the timing of her disappearance lines up with something else entirely, something far darker than fashion choices or family privacy. It lines up with the moment her name started showing up in federal documents she insists she had nothing to do with. Let's start with a trip that should have been routine. In May of 2026, Donald Trump flew to Beijing for one of the most important diplomatic visits of his second term. Cabinet officials went, Stephen Miller went, Marco Rubio went, even his son Eric and daughter-in-law Laura went, occupying seats that, by every tradition of the office, belonged to the First Lady. Melania did not go. Her office gave the press exactly one sentence. She is not traveling this time. No explanation, no health reason, no scheduling conflict, just silence, dressed up as a press release. Compare that to 2017 when Melania toured Chinese schools, sat beside the Chinese First Lady at cultural events, and became the soft, smiling face of American diplomacy on foreign soil. That woman is gone. In her place is someone who would rather stay home than stand next to her own husband on the world stage. This is not the first sign that the public image of this marriage has cracked. In September of 2025, an anonymous art group quietly installed a statue on the National Mall in Washington showing Trump and Jeffrey Epstein standing arm in arm, a piece they titled "Best Friends Forever." It was removed within hours, but not before photographs of it spread across every major news outlet in the country. A protest statue does not appear out of nowhere. It appears because enough people already believe the friendship behind it was real, close, and far from the simple business acquaintance the White House has always described. You just watched the moment reporters confirmed it themselves. Melania Trump, missing from the passenger list of Air Force One, missing from the welcome ceremony in Beijing, missing from photos that, just 9 years ago, she dominated. Reporters called her absence glaring. They called it a pattern. And patterns do not happen by accident in a White House this controlled. Every appearance Melania makes, or does not make, is planned weeks in advance by a team of advisors who understand exactly how every photo will be read. So when that team decides the safest move is for the First Lady to disappear entirely from a major international trip, that is not an accident. That is a decision. And decisions like that get made for one reason: damage control. Even people inside the West Wing seemed caught off guard. Reporters noted that when the passenger manifest leaked, social media users immediately started asking why Eric Trump, Lara Trump, and a White House aide named Walt Nauta were boarding Air Force One while the actual First Lady was nowhere in sight. None of those three hold an official government position that would normally justify a diplomatic seat on a presidential trip. Yet they went, and she did not. If this were a one-time scheduling fluke, the explanation would have been easy. Instead, the White House offered one cold, generic line and moved on, the same way they have handled every uncomfortable question this year. So what is the damage they are controlling? Go back 1 month earlier, to April of 2026. The Department of Justice had just released another wave of documents from the Jeffrey Epstein investigation, the case that has haunted this administration since before Trump even returned to office. Buried inside those documents was a single email, dated 2002, sent to Epstein's closest associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. The message was short. It complimented Maxwell on how she looked in a magazine photo. It ended with 2 words: "Love, Melania." The names of the sender and recipient had been blacked out by the Justice Department, but reporters quickly connected the dots. It was her email. It was her signature. That is the First Lady of the United States, standing in the grand foyer of her own home, reading a prepared statement to deny a connection most Americans did not even know to ask about until that moment. Watch her face. Watch how carefully she chooses every word. She says Epstein did not introduce her to Donald Trump. She says the email to Maxwell was nothing more than a trivial, polite reply. She says she has never been named in a single court document, deposition, or victim statement connected to Epstein's crimes. All of that may be true, but here is what should stop you cold. Nobody forced her to make that statement. The West Wing did not even know the full content of her remarks before she walked out to deliver them. A sitting First Lady chose, on her own, to step in front of cameras and publicly deny a scandal that had mostly stayed in the background for years. People do not do that unless they believe the story is about to get a lot bigger and they want to get ahead of it before it does. The reaction afterward only made the moment stranger. Former Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, once one of Trump's most loyal defenders before a public falling out, praised Melania for the statement and thanked her for standing up for survivors. Democrats on the House Oversight Committee, the very people you would expect to attack a Trump statement, instead said they agreed with her and pushed for the same public hearing she had called for. When figures on opposite sides of the aisle both treat a denial as credible evidence that something deeper needs investigating, that tells you the statement raised more questions than it answered. And in the background of all of this sits a separate ongoing legal fight between Melania's lawyers and journalist Michael Wolff, who has spent over a year reporting claims about her relationship to Epstein that her legal team has tried, so far without success, to force him to retract. And there is more buried in those same files. A photograph released and then quietly pulled down by the Justice Department within 24 hours, showing Trump, Epstein, Melania, and Ghislaine Maxwell together inside a drawer of personal photos at one of Epstein's properties. The department never explained why the image disappeared from its own website. It simply vanished, the same way Melania herself seems to vanish whenever the spotlight gets too hot. 2 disappearances, 1 pattern. Now here is where the story turns, because Melania is not the only person in that marriage who has been going missing lately. Just weeks after her Epstein statement, something strange started happening to her husband too. And this part of the story does not stop at health. Just 1 day before Melania's name resurfaced in those documents, the House Oversight Committee heard testimony from Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates, who admitted under oath that meeting with Epstein had been, in his own words, a grave error in judgment. One major name after another, all connected to the same man, all forced into public reckonings within weeks of each other. The Trump family was never going to be the exception.
A sudden silence from the White House has sparked a storm of speculation, and this time it's all about the health of Donald Trump. Rumors exploded online after the president abruptly canceled all public appearances on a Saturday, an unusual move that immediately raised alarm bells. According to the Mirror US, the White House announced at around 11:08 a.m. that Trump would not be stepping out for the rest of the day.
For 7 straight days at the end of May into June of 2026, Donald Trump did not hold a single public event. No rally, no press conference, no open press gaggle, nothing. For a man who has spent his entire political life chasing cameras, who built an entire brand on being seen constantly, 7 silent days is not normal. It is alarming. Journalist Aaron Rupar was the one who first pointed it out, noting that the president's last confirmed public appearance was a cabinet meeting on May 27th, the day after his 3rd visit to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in just over a year. 3 visits to a major military hospital in 13 months, from a president whose doctors insist is in excellent health. Read that sentence again. It does not add up. Social media filled the silence with theories, some wild, some not so wild. Users pointed out that Trump tends to disappear around the start of every single month, calling it a pattern long before anyone confirmed a medical reason for it. Others zeroed in on the visible bruising that has shown up repeatedly on the back of his hands over the past year, along with swelling in his lower legs that aides have tried to hide with looser pants and longer sock lines in public photos. The White House has blamed the bruising on frequent handshaking and the leg swelling on a common, mostly harmless condition called chronic venous insufficiency. Maybe that is the full story, but full stories do not usually require 3 hospital visits and just over a year and a week of total public silence to explain. CBS medical analysts looked at the report the White House eventually released and said the same thing doctors across the country were saying privately. Key information was missing, not wrong, not contradicted, missing, gaps where you would expect detail. The president's physician described strong cardiac, pulmonary, and neurological function, the kind of broad, reassuring language that tells you very little while sounding like it tells you everything. CNN's own cardiology analyst, a doctor who once cared for Vice President Dick Cheney, publicly asked why Trump needed a repeat coronary CT scan only 6 months after his last one, when doctors typically only repeat that scan if the first one showed something concerning. Nobody from the White House has ever answered that question directly. Think about what that actually means coming from trained physicians, not partisan commentators, not online conspiracy accounts, but doctors who read medical reports for a living. When a cardiologist who has cared for a sitting vice president publicly asks why a scan was repeated early, he is not guessing. He is telling you, in careful professional language, that something in the original results likely concerned somebody enough to order it again. The White House response to that question was silence, the same silence that met every other hard question this spring. And notice the timing again, because timing is the thread that ties this entire story together. The White House did not release the medical report quickly or eagerly. They sat on it for 3 full days while public pressure built, while reporters asked the same questions over and over, while social media filled up with theories about hand bruising, leg swelling, and a president who suddenly stopped wanting to be photographed up close. 3 days of silence from a man who has never in his life gone 3 days without saying something to somebody on camera. 3 days of silence is not how a healthy, transparent White House behaves. It is how a White House behaves when it is buying time to figure out exactly how much to admit. White House spokesperson Davis Ingle insisted the president remains the sharpest and most accessible leader in American history, working non-stop to deliver on his promises. Read that statement next to the actual calendar. A full week with no rallies, no press conferences, and no open events does not match the word accessible by any definition most people would recognize. When officials insist something loudly enough, often enough, it usually means the thing they are insisting on is exactly what people have started to doubt. So let's put the full picture together, because each piece on its own might look like nothing. Melania skips a major foreign trip with zero explanation. Weeks earlier, she stood alone in front of cameras to deny a connection to one of the most disturbing scandals in modern American history. A scandal her own name appears inside, in her own handwriting, in a federal document. Around the very same window of time, her husband goes dark for an entire week, skips out on the basic transparency every modern president has provided, and lets his own medical team release a report so vague that trained physicians publicly call it incomplete. 2 of the most photographed people on the planet, both choosing invisibility, both choosing silence at the exact moment real scrutiny finally arrived at their door. Is it a coincidence? Powerful people will tell you it is. They will tell you Melania has always valued her privacy, that presidents get tired, that medical reports are routine and boring and nothing to read into. But ask yourself something simple. If there really was nothing to hide, why does every single explanation arrive late, arrive vague, and arrive only after reporters force the question? Real transparency does not wait 3 days. Real innocence does not require a hand-picked, advisor-approved statement read once and never followed by questions. Real health does not require a third hospital visit in 13 months, followed by a week of total public silence. Look back at history for a moment, because America has seen this exact playbook before. Other administrations on both sides of the aisle have tried to manage bad news by simply reducing how often their most visible figures appear in public. Less exposure means fewer unscripted questions. Fewer unscripted questions means fewer chances for a slip of the tongue or an awkward moment caught on camera. It is not a new strategy. What makes this version different is the sheer number of fronts it is being used on at once. Epstein documents on one side, health questions on the other, a first lady and a president, both retreating from the public eye in the very same stretch of weeks, is not the kind of coincidence that survives a closer look. What we are watching is not random bad luck for two unlucky public figures. It is a pattern, repeated again and again, every single time the walls start closing in. When the Epstein files threatened to swallow her name, Melania disappeared from a presidential trip days later. When health questions about the president became too loud to ignore, he disappeared from public view for the longest stretch of his second term. Disappearance has become this administration's go-to strategy whenever a hard question shows up. Not denial, not explanation, just absence, until the news cycle moves on to something else and everybody quietly forgets to ask again. But some of us are not going to forget to ask again. The documents are public record. The flight manifests are public record. The medical reports, vague as they are public record. Reporters did the work of finding the gaps. All that is left is for the public to notice the pattern before it disappears too, the same way the photograph on the Justice Department's own website disappeared overnight without a single word of explanation. So here is the real question hanging over the Trump White House tonight. Is the First Lady simply a private person who prefers to stay out of the spotlight, or is she someone whose own legal team has decided that less exposure means less risk every single time another batch of Epstein documents gets released? Is the president resting after a routine checkup, or is a man approaching his 80th birthday hiding something his own doctors are too careful to spell out in plain English? Nobody outside that inner circle knows for certain. But the pattern speaks for itself, and patterns, unlike press statements, do not lie. Melania Trump went missing right when the Epstein files needed answers. Donald Trump went missing right when his health needed answers. 2 disappearances, 1 marriage, 1 administration, and 1 question America deserves to have answered out loud. What exactly are they so afraid of letting us see? Drop your own theory in the comments below. And if this video helped connect the dots for you, make sure to like and subscribe so you do not miss the next time this story resurfaces. Because if the pattern we just laid out holds true, it will resurface again, probably sooner than the White House would like.